Okay, I'm going to ask a question today that is kind of philosophical in a way. In a way. Not sure that you'll agree.
In a way.
And it is this. What TV character reminds you the most of yourself?
Oh, man.
Okay. Philosophical.
Yeah, where's the philosophy involved in this?
I don't know. Like, I don't know. I think that I use that word for also just deep.
Is this a deep question?
Or like difficult to think about?
Interesting. Most reminds me of myself.
Like when you're watching it, you're like, dude,
that's me.
I would say that. Or if people are like, oh my gosh, that's so you.
If this was, wait, does it have to be TV? Can it be a movie?
Sure.
Okay, Troy Bolton for sure.
Oh my gosh.
Gosh.
I cannot.
Dude, get your head in the game. Troy Bolton.
Is that aspirational or is that like actual?
If you're not
What
watching
do you
this, my
think?
eyes are rolling so hard.
Clearly. It's true.
Also, High School Musical, for those of you that don't know.
Yes. Man, if you don't know that, come on.
What are you even doing?
If you don't know, now you know.
I
What
played
about
basketball
him?
in high school. I did drama also in high school. That's all you need to know.
That's it. So everyone listening to this, if you played basketball and did drama in high school, you two are like Troy Bolton.
The character himself? Like,
Well, yeah, and I
Are you
look
that
like
much
Zac
in your
Efron.
feels all the time? That dude was in his feels all of the time. Were you?
Yeah, you're right. No, it's not. It's more so aspirational.
Oh, there you go.
okay, all right. I do see a slight resemblance of Zac Efron when he was
Is this gonna be
young.
the nicest thing you'll ever say
To
me?
you.
Wow.
Yeah, if that's nice.
Josh, when
I'm
I was
flattered.
thinking of you, I was thinking of Sokka from Last Airbender. That's who I thought of.
The
Is that
one who
good or
always
bad?
gets made
Yeah,
fun
what's
of.
that mean?
Well, I mean, also he's like funny and he's always like scheming and planning.
Actually, last
was
night
thinking
we were talking
SpongeBob.
about if we were talking about which New Girl character we would be, and we were talking about you, Josh, and we said you were like Jessica Day.
That's probably true.
That's hilarious because I think that's my answer to this question.
Okay, really?
Because every time we're watching it, Jono says that he's like, oh my gosh, she's such a 2, or like you would so do that.
Okay.
That's funny. She's a little quirkier than you are. I
For
would say
sure.
you're not quite.
I think
you're
it's
not
me
that
like
quirky.
deeper down, like someone
Yeah.
who knows me well would say that, but she and I don't really come off the same way. Yeah.
Totally. That
But
two
that's the
vibes.
only person I've ever watched and I've been like, oh, that's hilarious. I relate to that so deep.
I don't know if I have a great answer. Mine's maybe more aspirational because I just think she's awesome, and there's some like a few outward similarities. Lorelai Gilmore.
Dude.
We both
That
just
is a
like
great
talk a lot.
answer.
Pretty good.
We both talk a lot, and we both drink a lot of coffee.
They're both very like direct.
kind of quick and
yeah.
you know.
She
Whatever.
makes more
Quippy.
pop culture references than
But
you
yeah,
do.
there are other
Things
things,
that
and like her personality. I've not thought about it that much, but I wish I was.
All the
I
people
see it,
she's
though.
dated kind of are like Luke.
She,
That's true.
That's true.
That's actually true.
oh my,
That's actually true.
That's going out into the world.
That's hilarious. That is so funny.
Okay, I got a real answer.
It's well observed.
Speaking of Luke Skywalker.
Josh, we're moving
stop
on.
just saying-
Seriously.
Listen, their feels all
Stop
of the
just
time.
saying who you want to
We're
be
moving
like.
on from you.
Okay, to be honest, I don't have an answer. That's why I'm coming up with random ideas.
You know, honestly, actually, back to New Girl, Winston. You have very Winston vibes.
You do have Winston
like with his
vibes.
bird shirts and his pranks and
Winston
like.
is a
I've never worn a bird
president.
shirt.
I know, but you would.
Sure.
I can see that being a thing for you.
I got a bird
Yeah.
shirt vibe on right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Old Navy.
I cannot get any coffee out of this cup right now.
For those of you that are listening and not watching, Molly has the tiniest iced coffee cup you've ever seen. Imagine like a 12-ounce iced coffee cup and then cut it in half.
But the straw is like,
6
and then they cut the straw to match.
is only sitting about 3/4 of an inch above the
very
lid.
awkward.
So I have to like go above at like a really weird angle to get the straw. Yeah.
I would trade with you if we could.
Yeah.
I love those tiny cups. They bring me joy.
It's not the cup, it's the straw.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I don't know how I would answer this. Most of the time I watch it. My wife and I watch shows together. She always pegs me as the Like she's like, you're just like the villain. I'm like, oh God. Thanks. But I think probably Tony Stark. Like that's the one.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that.
I would identify as Tony
I
Stark.
love
Dude,
Iron.
he's
I
a
think
great
he's one of my
character.
favorite Marvel characters.
For sure.
Iron Man.
I got another one for me.
Oh, Josh, you are done.
Who are you going to
Guys,
say?
Peter Parker.
Oh,
That's not what I actually think that's decent.
No, that's a decent answer. That's a decent
Yeah,
answer.
Peter Parker.
Guy with
Peter
the
Parker's
raccoon.
Kind of
decent answer.
quirky, little flighty.
Yes.
Like, I'd say I'm kind of lovable like Peter Parker.
Yeah, I think so.
I can't.
I thought you were going to say Star-Lord.
Oh yeah, Starlight. That's a good one too.
Yeah, but he's the reason all of humanity, like half of the universe was destroyed.
Kenna, come on.
No, that's not fair. That was Thanos' fault. Like you can't like put it all on.
That's
Starlight.
true, but man, they would have won if it was for
That's true.
Star-Lord.
Speaking of deconstructing the world.
Whoa, Kenny, you're getting so good at these transitions.
Seamless.
Thank you. They're always on the spot too.
I guess that
You don't say.
I usually like to be prepared for things, but I'm getting pretty good at these on the spot transitions.
Impromptu.
We're gonna talk about deconstruction today.
Hey,
Friggin' do it.
We wanted to talk about this, and we were all really excited to do it because it's been in our conversations so much.
Yes.
At work, outside of work. I was joking about it that I was recently on vacation. It came up a bunch of times, even while I was on vacation, talking to people I didn't know. It feels like it's very much a part of kind of the cultural moment is people using this language of deconstructing their faith or like taking a step back from faith and figuring out like, is this what I believe anymore? And so we wanted to kind of address that today together. So I wanted to just kind of talk about like, why do you guys think this is happening? Why is this such a prevalent conversation right now? It seems like more than ever.
Yeah. I mean, this feels like a packed answer for that many people give for all the things. I really do think it's in large part because of the pandemic. I think that there's like an element, I mean, at least in the West, or at least in America, which is where we live, and in the conversations, I think I would peg it on a couple things. One is the pandemic. Two is the massive cultural upheaval and polarization that we're getting on the cultural left, on the cultural right, and I guess on the political left and the political right. Particularly for Christians, I would say that we just sat through a season where we specifically watched the political, like the politicization, how am I going to say that? I can't do it.
Politicalization. Politicalization. Oh, he's still going. If Ashley was here, she'd be losing her mind.
Politicization, thank you, of our
I don't think I
faith
said it right.
into
Yeah.
at least in a way that was so explicit that it's difficult to ignore in the last season. And so we, because of that, I think that's also part of the reason why it's causing it. So those would be the couple things that I would see. I don't know what you guys think, if you've seen anything else.
Yeah. I think you're right. We posed the question on social media, plug if you don't follow us at Our Restless Hearts.
There you go.
In preparation for this to kind of hear other people's thoughts on some of this.
Yes.
And that was a couple of the answers we got is we
Sure.
were like, if you are going through deconstruction, like why would you say that is?
Yes.
And more than one person was like, honestly, politics.
Yes. Politics was it
was.
So
Yeah.
And so I think that because of that, and the reason why this happens is that when something is made so explicit, like so much of what happened in our last season of at least culture, like culturally, like in the intersection of like politics and religion, so much of the quiet stuff was said out loud, particularly amongst religious, like the religious community. How much church community and Christians invested in seeing their ethical visions get carried out into political spheres. And some of those are very contrary to the, at least their versions of Christianity seems very contrary to the teachings of Jesus. And I would put that on the political left and on the political right. You know, that there's just ways that has gotten flushed out. And so people are reacting to that pretty heavily. And then I also think that there is no way that you can watch the death of hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. And then when Christians say we believe in a loving God, allow that, like, that's just going to cause you to ask a massive number of questions to say, how would a loving God allow something like coronavirus to exist? Even if you have intellectual answers and you've worked that out, or that's not the particular reason, that is like a low burning kind of anxiety or things that are happening inside of us. That would be the things that I'd say.
Yeah. And I'd also say that I think that deconstruction is always occurring on our phones. Like in the sense of every meme that you see is just deconstruction of something. Like basically every time any event occurs, all you see is a bunch of people making fun of the thing that occurs. And trying to deconstruct it to the minimalist point of what it is. And just trying to say, this doesn't matter. Like basically blowing everything up. And that seems to be what the internet is always about. And so I think that like, especially when you have more access to information than's ever existed, it's gonna cause you to honestly have our brains break a little bit, right? Because there's so much coming in, there's so much input happening that it's hard to discern anything. It's hard to say, like, it's hard to get anywhere because there's always questions that can come because of the amount of information that exists. And because of that, it's almost like I think theoretically we would think more information would allow for more answers. And I actually think it's probably produced a lot more questions. And so it does feel like the sheer amount of information, but mixed with people being able to say whatever they want out loud on the internet at any time. It just creates an environment where everyone's influenced by everything all the time. And it's hard not to do anything but deconstruct it because it just feels like everything is vulnerable to being deconstructed.
That's good, Josh.
Yeah. I also was going to say social media. It feels like kind of a pat answer, like you're saying, like the pandemic, social media. But at least what I see on Instagram, TikTok, I'm not really on Twitter, but probably there too. Like, I'm also not on TikTok, for the record. I just feel like I have to say that.
Just an example for the rest of you hooligans.
You don't have to be on TikTok if you don't want to.
But I think specifically, not just deconstruction in general, but deconstruction of Christianity, I see all over Instagram. And I think a lot of people are sharing a lot of thoughts. And I think we have kind of come to a place in our culture where we choose who we want to listen to. And so when we see people who we trust, or honestly even just strangers or things that feel like we connect with them, we see other people deconstructing and we're like, oh, I should be doing that too. Oh, that's a really good point that you made. Why haven't I thought about that? Oh, maybe I should be on the same page as you because you're experiencing this. And like the way that we share information and the way that we take in information and learn and receive, I think has a lot to do with it, almost like the widespread nature of deconstruction of Christianity specifically that I think is happening right
that's
now.
really interesting because a lot of the things that we're seeing happening, whether it's like global catastrophes, moral failures, the marriage of ideology with or theology and politics, that's all been around for a really long time. But all of a sudden you throw in a mechanism or an avenue by which everyone can have a hot take on it. And the amount of content that gets generated around every single pastoral moral failure, every time Christians are hypocritical, all of these things, or all of the cognitive dissonance that the pandemic causes, then every person who has a phone can then generate content that gives a hot take on that. And that's what we're all ingesting constantly because it doesn't feel like the events have changed all that much. Like pastors, mainly dudes, are still like not doing things with their naughty bits that they shouldn't, like I mean, they still are. That just has continued to happen. And like there's still damage being done by evil in the world. Like, so like all of that stuff has happened.
Right.
And now we can just elevate the dialogue about the dissonance that causes at a massive scale.
Well, and
Yeah.
something
That's really
that I
interesting.
also think is unique is, and this is just an observation that I've been having lately, is I've been having a lot of conversations about people and their experience with church in the last few weeks, and the consistent, as I ask them, like, what's it been like following Jesus like for you lately? And the consistent answer that they define following Jesus as is, I listen to a podcast occasionally. I listen to a sermon occasionally. And I think it goes into that in the sense of, when we look for answers, or when we're looking for some sort of discernment about what does God think, what is Christianity about, we can pick and choose certain humans' voices
Yeah.
Right.
to kind of discern that for us, rather than doing the work with God's Spirit on
Right.
our own, or rather than doing the work of looking to Scripture and actually discern, like trying to discern, what does God think about me, the world, everything else. And I think that creates a lot of dissonance, because you hear Christians think this and this and this and this that often oppose each other.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of like, well, I don't know what this thing's actually about, or where
Yeah.
I land in it, or where I'm supposed to fall. And it frees us to actually pick and choose what we believe.
Yes, yeah,
Because
yeah.
it frees us to go, well, that person thinks that and I like that.
What
and that
feels
person
right.
thinks that and I like that. And it
Right.
seems all arbitrary anyway. So
Yeah.
might as well just land wherever everyone, like, what feels good.
Right.
Yeah.
Versus actually like doing the work of finding the truest interpretation of God
Right.
that you
Yeah.
possibly
Right.
can, and
Right.
in relationship with Him that you possibly can. And I think that's also largely, like you said, Garrett, because of the pandemic. That
Yeah.
many people's access to what they considered Christianity or God
Yeah.
was limited to
Sure.
consuming some sort of Christian program.
Media,
And we're
yeah.
we're actively doing that.
We are
Like,
we
Right,
are
right,
doing
right.
that right now. Yes,
Right.
yes,
Well,
yes.
yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
no,
I mean,
yeah.
but I've made a similar observation, Josh, in my conversations recently, that, people will kind of share, like, I'm actually kind of going through a deconstruction, and I'll be like, oh, tell me more about that. And a lot of times their kind of issue or catalyst for that has been Christians, as opposed to Christ himself, has been like, well, I've seen Christians do this year, and that's been really damaging. So how can I be a part of that? Yeah. Or I've seen Christians react this way, and not necessarily like, I'm wondering this about Christ, or I'm wondering about the divinity of Christ. Like, that's not often what is happening.
And what in our conversations.
Right. And I think that's really interesting. And so I almost want to take a step back in the conversation and actually kind of define deconstruction then. Like, is that deconstruction of faith? Is that a critique of faith? Like,
yes.
How are we defining deconstruction, at least for this conversation, in the ways that we've been talking about it lately?
Yeah. I think that what you're saying, Ken, is that the conversations we seem to be having and we watch happening online most of the time go something like this, like Christians did this harmful thing, I don't want to be a part of it. Deconstruction means, do I still want to be associated with a group that is perpetuating harm, oftentimes from marginalized and vulnerable communities, is progressing agendas that seem antithetical to their own faith statements? So there's some version of hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Do I want to be associated with a group of people that are so drastically hypocritical?
Totally. I feel like that has been definitely what's been reflected to me lately in conversations and online.
Yeah. And I think the other sense I get is, and the other conversations I've had, is that deconstruction is like, honestly, the definition of deconstruction is getting to the essence of what the thing is.
Yes.
But I don't think that that's often what's happening. I think that what we call deconstruction is actually a process of just basically questioning and doubting, and then eventually saying, this isn't it, and I'm going to make my own thing. And I think in a way, sometimes resistance and deconstruction is confused in a way that is, and not, I'm not even saying that in pejorative or negative sense, just like an actual sense of like, I want to resist this thing, and then we call that deconstruction. And I don't know if that's actually what deconstruction is. I think that that's actually just the language you'll hear is I want to take a step back from church. I want to take a step back from Jesus. I want to take a step back from Christianity.
Yes.
And while you can do that in deconstruct, I often don't feel like that's done, or I see it done in a pursuit of deconstruction.
Yeah.
I see that done in a pursuit of just resistance.
Sure.
In a lot of ways.
Or I would say to some degree too, it might be resistance, and it also might be self-preservation.
Yeah, that's
like,
true too.
Like if you are part of the marginalized group, like, and you've felt attacked by or harmed by the institution of the church or other Christians, you're pulling back because I don't want to continually put myself in spaces where I'm being actively harmed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Or I don't want to keep putting myself in situations where a group that I'm tied to are actively harming other people.
Yeah.
And I don't like how that makes me feel about myself, So yes, there's like an element of, it could be resistance to whatever the ethical teachings of Jesus, but also it could also be, man, I believe in the ethical teachings of Jesus and I don't see us doing that, or they weren't, that group of people that said they believe that are actually hurting me. So I need to take a step back as well.
Yeah, and I think what I hear you saying in that, Josh, is that that's not necessarily bad or wrong,
Right, yeah.
but that it's helpful to name what we're actually doing, as opposed to just kind of labeling any doubt or question or dissonance or pause or all of that, putting all of that under the umbrella of deconstruction might not actually be that beneficial for you in that experience.
Yes.
Like that,
Yep.
that if you are taking a step back for self-preservation, that like, that's okay, that there are different places that we all are in our discipleship, in our relationship with the Lord, like that, yeah, we all are in so many different places,
Right.
but that it's actually more helpful for us individually to say what it is that we're experiencing more specifically so that we can fully be in that season or fully be in that spot, instead of trying to just kind of exist ambiguously in an in-between of faith or not faith and not even really know what we're experiencing.
Yeah, and I think that at times, I think one can lead to the other. Like you get in this spot, like, I don't know, I'm just thinking through like some of the conversations I've had recently and what I've been reading and watching and observing is it can start with when I was at church, I felt lots of shame. And the sermons, my small group, there was a lot of shame built into the way that was ultimately trying to make me modify my behaviors. And they used a lot of shame-based behavior modification techniques in order to make me look a certain way that's culturally appropriate inside of the church. And then and they're like, I don't like how that feels. But then that could go into an actual deconstructive mode, which is like a deconstruction in ideology. And so then they might be like, oh, like why does the church do that? And they might look at different ways of explaining the death of Jesus, or the ways that churches try to help make a conversion moment for people, and they will look at the kind of narratives that they build up, or the way church services are structured, or purity culture. We did that whole thing, and all of these different kind of ways that they felt harmed. And then they might move into actual deconstructing, looking at the ideas, trying to help figure out why their church, and then they look at those ideas and then deconstruct those. So I think it can go multiple different ways as well.
What would you say if someone, like, we're kind of saying that there's a lot of different things that we label as deconstruction that might not be in how we're defining it right now.
Yeah.
What could some of those other places look like? Like, if someone is experiencing dissonance or doubt or frustration, like, what might some of those other spaces look like that would be helpful to label very specifically? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well, I was just thinking about it as you guys were talking too, and I think that almost what we're describing is sort of two things that seem to be rising to the surface. One is like a deconstruction of like theological ideas, and one almost sounds like it's more like a critique of the church community or culture, and doesn't have a ton to do with Jesus. I would say that's kind of what we're saying is not necessarily deconstruction as we are defining it here, a critique of the church and the way that culture has been formed in the church around things like purity and all of this other stuff. Like, to have a genuine critique of that does not necessarily mean you are deconstructing your faith.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's a really helpful thing to kind of separate.
Yes, and I think you could feel deconstructed.
Totally.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because so much of your identity was wrapped up in being part of a social group, and the dissonance you feel deconstructed. You feel ripped apart. You feel like your identity is coming apart. But I think that's a really important distinguishing element. I think that we're talking, at least in talking about deconstruction in the way that we want to talk about it.
I think it's really important that you said that, Kenna, because I think that at least I experienced being raised in the church to not question.
Right.
And then when I had it, making me feel like I wasn't as faithful.
Like it's shaking your whole faith.
Or I wasn't a good follower of Jesus, or I wasn't a good Christian if I just didn't have faith. And I think it's really important to say that Jesus was a critic.
Yes.
Because it allows us to exist as followers of Jesus and members of the church and have doubt and have questions and have critiques, and recognize that if you have those things, you don't have to disqualify yourself. Because I think that I see that in myself. I think that I've seen that in a lot of other people, that it's just kind of the hush-hush mentality of just like, God, I have a doubt, help me believe.
Yes.
And I think that it's important to recognize that if you have doubts, I mean, not if, when you have doubts, when you have questions, when you have like critiques, that doesn't mean that you're not a good Christian anymore, or that doesn't mean that you're not close to Jesus anymore, or that he doesn't love you as much, or that like you're not as much of a follower as other people are. And I think it's important to say that, because I think that we can call it deconstruction and feel like, well, I can't do this anymore because I just have too many questions. I have too many doubts. And I'd say that I think for people that might be true, for a lot of people actually feeling genuinely like I can't do this anymore. But I think that there's also a different side of it that I hope can be an encouragement, that is that the thing that you feel passionate about, or the thing that you want to critique, or the thing that you want to like enter into, that you think the church is doing wrong, or you think Christians are doing wrong, actually, rather than making it feel like you're unfaithful, that could be an invitation from God to be a part of the thing that he wants to do, meaning you're more faithful.
Yes, that's right.
Meaning you're actually being invited into a way that is more like following Jesus, not less like following Jesus.
That's so good,
and
Josh.
we have to make that normal in church communities, and give space for people to ask questions, and give space for people to like have doubts and wonder. Because sometimes the church leaders need to hear that.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like
Totally.
often the church leaders need to hear those things, not out of like cancel them, but out of like, let's commit to being a better community together and grow together. I think it's important to say that.
That's so good. So if it's okay as a Christian to doubt and to have questions, and we're saying that is like normal and doesn't mean our faith is weak, I think maybe some of the tension around deconstruction is that I have these feelings and doubts and dissonance that I'm experiencing, and I don't know what to do with it. Like, it's just, I think it can feel overwhelming.
Right.
Like,
Totally.
I don't even know where to start. I am frustrated. I'm seeing things. I'm feeling things. I don't know what I believe.
Yes.
And I think that is why it leads people ultimately to just say, I'm taking a step back, because it's so overwhelming. And it's just incredibly difficult. And if you don't feel like you have a community where you can ask questions, then it just adds to that, and isolation, all that stuff.
Yes.
So I think my question is, how do we productively walk through our doubts and our frustrations and our confusion when we experience dissonance in what we believe or what we've been taught versus what we see, or versus what someone else is teaching us about who Jesus is? What do we do? Like, how do we move into that?
Yeah, that's a good call.
I think one place to potentially start, and this is just so simple, but is to determine and kind of define for yourself and put language around what it is exactly that you are struggling with. And maybe it's a lot of things, and that's great. That's totally fine. But I would almost encourage people to kind of do away, just even as a thought experiment, with the word deconstruction. Like, I'm going through a deconstruction. Instead, to say, I'm really struggling with the way that the church has treated the LGBTQ plus community, and that has caused in me a dissonance that I'm trying to walk through.
Yes.
Like that level of specificity will be so much more productive, and I think actually bring a little bit of peace to you as the person going through that, because there's somewhere to go from it. Like, there are things to read, there are people to talk to, there is a path forward in something that specific. That deconstruction and this kind of I think it's just kind of a painful term to just to think of yourself as like, I am deconstructing. That feels very like, what do you do with that?
Yeah, it almost feels like deconstruction is a masking word.
Yeah.
You know, like when someone says I'm sad.
Yeah, right.
You know, like
right.
And that's actually just a generic word for an actually more true emotion that's below it that you don't have access to or haven't spent the time to language, or I'm angry. Like,
or maybe there are a lot of things and so it's easier to put one word over it.
Yes.
But actually to kind of sit there and be like, what are the things that are causing me to either want to take a step back or say, I actually don't think I'm a Christian anymore, but like name what those things are, I think can be a good place to start in productivity toward like, where do I go from here?
Right.
Yeah, because I think what I often see is, or a common statement is, I don't want to be about the church, or the church is bad at this thing and the church is bad at this thing. And I think I'd encourage anyone who feels that way to be specific about what you mean when you, like what Ken is saying, be specific about what you mean when you say that. Like, which church? Why? Like, where did you experience that? Because I think what we often do is actually take a cultural critique of the church and apply it to ourselves.
Yeah.
And honestly, in a way of self-preservation, in a way of like going, well, that's how society feels about this, and I don't want to be seen that way, and I don't want to be a part of something like that. So I need to distance myself from that. I need to do something about that. And honestly,
I need to not do something about that.
I need to not do something about that, because what sadly I often see is people experiencing that, but then ending up with just rubble, like nothing. Like there's not actually a worldview that's formed very like strongly. That's just kind of going about trying to figure out here and there, what do I actually feel according to often what culture is telling me to feel and to experience, and I don't want to be harmful, and I don't want to do this, and having all these feelings. But I think that it's going to be far more productive for all of us if we're specific about what we actually experience. And I think that, and I'm not saying people don't do that, because I know many people do, but I think that sometimes I see an importing of a cultural idea about the church on our own faith, rather than making it about what you actually believe, what you actually are walking through with Jesus, and what you're processing. And being specific can actually really help you kind of get to the root of what you are wondering about, what's frustrating, what's difficult, and thus what you can do about it going forward.
One of the things that I was thinking about was because of our cultural moment, because of the massive numbers of things that we've been through, and then the pandemic isolated ourselves, right? We oftentimes would turn to social devices, like social media platforms, to help us make sense of our worlds, which is real. Like that's like the social media is like such an incredible connection tool for that. You have access to voices, marginalized voices get amplified in really profound and beneficial ways through that level of democratization, which I think is really important. However, at the same time, it also has a tendency to take every worst part from every community worldwide and then focus it into very specific narratives about what the institution could be, because because maybe that is part of the narrative that needs to be critiqued, and that's bringing it forth. But what we don't know is of the like the institution of the church. But we also don't know is that like was that true of your experience? So as you're seeing, like if you're as you're all anyone's looking at a deconstructionist account or watching someone deconstruct online, raising the questions that they do, looking at the resources that they do, having other voices put on whatever social media account that might be, realize that those are particular stories from particular communities that might feel true to you. But the next most important step is to do the work of saying, yes, that rings true to me, but how specifically did I experience that in my church with this pastor, with this small group, with this community of people? Not to put them on blast, but to root your actual anxiety, your actual pain into the specific experiences that you have had. Yeah. Rather than just saying like, oh, the church is bad at that. Like when I get that, it's like, oh, the church should be about that. It might be about this justice initiative, or the church needs to make amends for this. As I'm like, oh yeah, definitely. Tell me how Ecclesia has not done that. Tell me how Ecclesia perpetuated that thing. And like oftentimes when you make it that specific for people, what I hear in return is like, oh no, like Ecclesia is fine. I'm like, oh, okay. So like help me understand how we have done it well so we can continue to do that. Or they'll say, oh no, you did it here, here, and here. And like, okay, that's really helpful. So I think that as much as we can possibly do it, root our deconstruction or root that anxiety or root all that stuff in your actual lived experience with specific things. That is a helpful way to be productive about the things that you're feeling.
Yeah. And I would say have the courage to then move beyond that. Yeah. Like once you identify the root of your frustration, the root of your dissonance, and you are able to specifically label what you're experiencing, like then have the courage to seek answers. And that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to find them super easily, that it will be black and white, that it will be a very smooth process. But I would encourage people to have the courage to then like fully walk down that path.
Yes.
To fully engage with the thing that, with maybe a lot, but like start with one, the thing that is bringing you doubt and frustration. Like for example, if you are feeling frustrated because how could a loving God allow pain to be in the world? And you're sitting with that question, like start talking to people about it. Start talking to the pastor of the church you go to. Read books about it. Like, do some research. Read things from multiple perspectives. Like, and I would say within that, to be thoughtful about how you consume information, and to be thoughtful about what it looks like to arrive at a conclusion. Like, I think it's easy to be very passive in this process, and that is an option, and that's totally okay if that is where we land, but I think it will not lead to rest in our passivity. And if we want to experience rest on the other side of this or in the midst of this, it takes courage, and it takes seeking, and it takes like effort and work. And when you're ready and when you're willing, I think that is that's so good. A very important part of this process, if you actually want to find the answers. And if you don't, if you just want to sit and say, this is frustrating to me and I don't know what to do with it, and I just want to be in that place, I think that's okay too, but name it.
Yes.
But if you are frustrated and doubting and you want to figure out how to find peace in the midst of that, then it's going to take work. And maybe that's not what we want to hear, but I think that is the reality. But you can do it. Like, you can do it.
And I think that as you're starting to sift through some of that information, if you do decide to make that courageous step to do that, I think it's super important to identify what you want to believe is true. Mm-hmm. Like what is your natural inclination? What is the thing in the question that you want to be true of your faith? Like, you need to be able to name that. Like, so if it's about queer inclusion and LGBTQ plus inclusion, like name that that's the thing that you really want. And then intentionally read all the sides. Because otherwise we will go into this confirmation bias mode on a historic trajectory of the church that has multiple ways to understand it, understand multiple issues that all of us are presently experiencing, and intentionally seek out and read the things that you don't want to be true. Because otherwise you're just going to read the things that are going to reconfirm the thing that you already want to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say the other way to make your process productive is to take, I mean, we're kind of hinting at this, but to take it all the way.
Yes.
To take your questions, to take your thoughts, to take it to the furthest conclusion of what that means.
That's so good, Josh.
Because if you don't, you're not landing anywhere.
Yeah.
You're just existing in between going, I don't know. And maybe you can get to a point where you say, I don't know. But at least do the work to be confident about getting to, I don't know. Because otherwise, we just claim ideas as what we believe in without having any clue of what that actually means or the implications of what that belief does. And so like Molly had said, like an example is if you are questioning, like, how could a good God cause such atrocity? Like go further in those questions. Like, where does good come from?
Yeah.
How do you know where good comes from? Like, why do you believe that good is good?
Yes.
Like, and do the work of getting there, because if you don't do that, often what I see done is people withdrawing from God on moral or ethical reasons, but they can't attach the moral or ethical reason to anything at that point, which doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't make sense to go, I don't believe in this because that's bad. But where did you get bad from?
Yeah.
Where's the standard? Where's the common good that you actually believe in? And you have to do the work to get there.
Yeah.
Or else there's nothing that you're actually standing upon other than just an idea you heard that you're just saying, sure, I'll have faith in that now.
Yeah.
And that's not deconstruction. That's just adjusting the thing that you already feel to some other ideology.
Yeah, you're having faith in another thing. Right?
Yes.
That's really interesting. If you ever want to go down a deep dive on where we get the idea of good, actually, the question that you just posed, Josh, is like a super old philosophical question. Plato wrote this. Plato had this conversation about with a dialogue called Euthyphro, and it was a conversation between Socrates and Euthyphro, and they asked that question. Like Euthyphro was asking this question, and Socrates was debating him. Euthyphro was like, no, like you have to get the good or the idea of the ethical from a transcendent, and Socrates is like, no, you don't. Like you can just it just can exist. You can get there by moral reason in a sense. So it's a really old dialogue. Like this isn't a brand new conversation, but you need, I think the biggest thing is that you need to follow it all the way down. Like if you don't think that the kingdom of God, the ethic of Jesus is going to create the best good for the society and the world and the way that you live, then find a different one and follow it all the way down. If you're an agnostic or atheist, like go there, like go all the way down. Try to figure out how to embed an idea of international, like inalienable human rights in an atheistic or agnostic philosophy. Like go all the way down, figure it out, and see if the world that the philosophers is able to construct is more beautiful or more robust than the one that Jesus constructed. Yeah. And then if you are convinced by that, then like have permission to be an atheist. Yeah.
Like, and if you need resources, send us a message.
Yes,
on Instagram.
Yeah, but I think that's an important thing to say. Is like I don't think Jesus or me as a pastor, or any like pastor wants you to believe something just for the sake of believing it. Like if you don't if you think that if you think that there's a better way to construct the common good for society, the world, and the way that you live, like I want you to follow that all the way down and actually live into it. Because then once you actually live into it, you and I can actually have a discussion about the common good, and we can actually have honest discussion and honest disagreement about the best way that the world can be organized. And that is the conversation that I think is most important. Mm-hmm. But if you just are like, if we're just sitting there like just kind of like, I don't know. I like the things that Jesus says, but like I don't really want to do the work. Then we can't actually have a dialogue about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I want to do.
Well, and I would say what it leads me to think about is I think I would ask, like, what does it look like to actually trust where you arrive when you go through deconstruction?
Yeah.
And I think it relates to this because I think it has to be, you have to go all the way to get to a point where you can trust where you arrive. Right. Otherwise, you're going to do it again, over and over and over again.
Yeah. And
there's going to be so much dissonance that it's hard to live into anything.
Yes.
And we don't want that for you, obviously. I think that if you don't do the work, you have to ask yourself, why do you trust yourself?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, that's all that you're, like, if it's just about a feeling of, I don't like that, it doesn't feel good, it just isn't good. You're basically just saying, I am reliant upon myself.
Or my feelings.
And my feelings. And I can't trust anything else out there, and I can't trust any other idea, so I have to trust myself. And I get where that comes from, but I would ask, what makes you think you can trust yourself to build a worldview that is more beautiful than the one Jesus gives us?
Yeah.
And you can't do that or stake the way that you're going to choose to live unless you do the work to get to that point. And I think we all want to say, like, have freedom in whatever that is, but at least do it so that you can be honest with yourself, so that you, are, like, in a way, you're not just thinking, because I think that people would often criticize the church for group thought.
Yeah.
And I think that we also have to recognize that it's exactly what you're doing if you don't do the work.
Yeah.
That it's just a reliance upon a group idea that you just think sounds really good for now.
Yeah.
And I'll be about it for a little bit.
Whoa.
And
let's go.
And it's just a herd mentality again. But we can all day criticize the church for having that, and I think there's valid reasons for that. Mm-hmm. But you're doing the same thing.
Yes.
And you're taking it at the same value, and you're just calling it something different.
Yeah.
And I think that that's important to name, because then you can be honest with yourself, and you can be honest intellectually, and you can be honest with your integrity, and that matters, or else you're honestly a slave to whatever the moment is, or whatever the feeling is, or whatever the vibe is. Because 10 years ago, the ideas that you have now wouldn't have been the ideas that you have now.
Yeah, right.
Even if you're the same age, because culture would have been different, and you just adjusted that according to it. Yeah. And so it has to be, going out, what do I actually believe about Jesus?
Yeah.
What do I actually believe about the world and how it functions, and like what that means for my life?
Right.
And take that to its conclusions, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like what we're essentially encouraging people to do is to, like, live in integrity with what you actually believe.
Yes.
And in order to do that, you have to determine what you actually believe, which takes a lot of courage, honesty with yourself, potentially some pretty intense and really prolonged, potentially seeking and learning and asking, so that you can then actually live out in integrity what it is that you believe.
Because I think what I'm saying is also is we want to honor that experience that you're having.
Totally.
Like, I think at least churches should, or like faith communities should say, like, you're having this experience. We don't want you to sweep it under the rug. We don't want you we want you to actually confront it, whether it was a way that the church harmed you through purity culture, or whether it's this question that you've seen how the church has harmed marginalized communities. Like that's a real experience. We don't want to minimize that.
Right.
We want to see what happens when you're honest with yourself and allow God's Spirit to direct you down in a spot. Or at least I would say it's God's Spirit, but it could just be you.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Totally. And I mean, like, as people are walking through that, and we're encouraging people to, like, very genuinely, like, if you are having questions and doubts and frustrations and critiques and all of that, we are saying walk that all the way through. And as people do that, how would you guys encourage them to find rest in the midst of that potentially very long process?
I mean, I think Josh was hinting at this, and I'll build into something, is like you at some point you have to wrestle with the core claims of who Jesus is. Like, I think one of the things that we've been thinking about as a team has been like, either Jesus is king or he's not. So what does it look like for you to actually wrestle with that in its fullness? Yeah. Because if we can start wrestling with the core understanding of Jesus is king, then we can actually pick up the prophetic witness of Jesus against the religious establishment.
Yeah.
So I think that what I've seen often is that, or what I've experienced in myself, I'll just say this, is that I will look at the prophetic side of Jesus and how he critiques the religious establishment. And I love that part of him. I love it. But then he also asks me and critiques me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
He prophetically critiques the way that I perpetuate the same harm in the way that the religious establishment projects harm. Yeah. And you cannot, if Jesus is king, you cannot separate those two things. Yeah. And you cannot have one without the other, because he does both and he won't let you.
Yeah.
Jesus is highly concerned with people not being hypocrites.
Yep.
So if the institution of the church that Jesus adequately was going after also means that there is a particular holiness or ethical code that he's calling you to, because if you are part of that community, he does not want you to be a hypocrite. So that includes you. So here would be the thing that I encourage. For you to find rest, if you really are concerned about harming people, and the church harming people, like, look at, like, the person of Jesus actually is the best mode to critique the institution that you want to critique that is harming people. Because his own internal logic encourages the people in those institutions to become the type of people that aren't harming the queer community, that aren't harming the BIPOC community. Like, he's the one that is encouraging Christians to do that. Mm-hmm. So if your goal is to actually help the church to be a community of people that isn't actively perpetuating harm in the world, then the best mode to operate in is to follow Jesus. And to see how Jesus critiques those institutions himself. So that would be the thing that I would say, is that if you're going to deconstruct like Jesus.
Yeah,
be how I'd say.
Come on,
come on.
Yeah. I think that I would say, especially if you're wrestling with, obviously we're talking about Christianity here, and so if you're wrestling with that, like we've been saying, that often the deconstruction that happens is a result of, and understandably so, is a result of Christians being harmful, is a result of the church doing something that seems antithetical to Jesus. It's a result of just the outward expression of what Christians are doing. And I think that I would root it further than that. That if you're doing deconstruction, root it in if you actually believe Jesus is Lord.
Yeah.
It has to be about that versus I don't like that thing, and I don't like that thing, and I don't like that thing.
That's so good, Josh.
Because it has to be rooted in what do you actually believe about Jesus being Lord? Because you cannot say, I think Jesus is Lord, but I don't like everything that he says, or I don't agree with everything he says, because that, to me, just reveals, well, you don't think he's Lord.
Yes.
Because him being king has implications, and it means submission, and it means following, and it means trying to understand who he is. And if you do that, you can do the deconstruction necessary with him. You can ask the questions and say, God, I don't get it. Why is this happening?
Right.
But because I believe you're your Lord, I'm gonna be faithful. I'm gonna follow you.
That's so good.
I'm gonna submit and say, I don't understand, but you're Lord. Mm-hmm. And if I believe that to be true, then I can do that confidently. But if I don't believe that to be true, be honest about that. Yeah. Like, be honest about what you're questioning, not going, oh, I'm all about Jesus and not about the church, because that to me just says you're about ethics of Jesus. Why are you about the ethics of Jesus? Yes. Where does it actually come from? Mm-hmm. And in a lot of ways, like, it's antithetical to say you're not about the church, because Jesus' whole mission is the church, and you are the church. Yeah. And so it's a little bit sidetracked, but I think it matters in the sense of, like, getting to the root of, if Jesus is Lord, it means loving the church.
Yes.
Even if you have problems with it, Jesus leaves room for that.
Yeah.
Like just as Garrett was saying, like part of what the church is a dysfunctional, diverse, like beautiful community that doesn't get along all the time, that is opposed to each other, that doesn't understand things altogether, but is committed to the leadership of Jesus, but is committed to the lordship of Jesus together. And that means criticizing it sometimes.
Yes,
totally.
That means having doubts. That means having hard conversations. But don't just let the feeling of a doubt or a hard conversation say, well, then I can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because that honestly feels a little bit of a cop-out. And I want to challenge in that, because it's like, well, what do you actually believe about Jesus? Because don't claim that I believe this to be true about Jesus, but then all these other things, no. Well, you're calling yourself God at that point, because you're saying, I know what's best.
Whoa.
Like,
Whoa.
at that point, you're saying, I am the standard of what is right. I am the standard of what is wrong. I'm the standard of what should be followed and shouldn't be followed. And so, Lord, adjust to me.
Yeah.
And it's just dishonest.
Yeah.
And so I want to give an encouragement to say, well, what do you actually believe about him?
Jesus.
And then follow that. And and I don't want to say that in a sense of like, if you land on him not being Lord, awesome, like do that. That's fine.
Yes.
But
Awesome.
but do that in the sense of being honest about that.
Yeah, I mean, lots of people don't believe Jesus is Lord.
Yes,
you know,
totally.
and like, I think also as someone that grew up in the church, that can feel really scary.
Yes.
You know, like, so like, and I think that the other thing in there, Josh, that I think is interesting is like, is as you submit, like, and you learn to like listen and believe, and like, as the things don't make sense over time, God brings brings ways that, or things that you don't understand about who he is. Like, if you really care about it, it will awaken a hunger in you to learn as much as possible. Like, most of the pet projects that I have started with, God, I don't understand X.
Yeah.
And then I just like read every book that I mean, like, that's how I deal with it, but other people have different ways to deal with it. You know, like, so all of the things, like, I don't understand how politics in this work. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going all the way down, you know? And at some point too, you do get to point like there's so much, and I'm just going to trust in the mystery of it. You know?
Yep. Well, and when you do that, you get to root your faith in who Jesus is, not in an institution necessarily, not in the way that people portray Jesus to be, but because what happens is we see things that the church is about, and we can disagree with it for very valid reasons. But when we get into it and why Jesus is about it, it can change the whole aspect of what we think about that thing.
And here's the best part about this too, is that Jesus himself presents us with a way when we're confronted the fact with we were wrong and did something wrong because of previous beliefs that we have. Jesus actually has a whole way that we can ask and receive forgiveness, not only from God, but from one another. That there is a mechanism inside of Christianity itself that as you walk out that process, and if you go down the wrong paths, or you go and you follow the wrong ethical lines as they're like, there's a way, like a way for the forgiveness for forgiveness, and a way to repent and change your mind. And so I think that's one of the most beautiful things.
Freedom, because it's not about you thinking all the right things or knowing all the right things or doing all the right things. It's about, when we believe Jesus is Lord, accepting the grace of his gift and love for you.
Yeah, that's so good.
And then wrestling with him and figuring it out, and knowing that all of us on this couch will have things that we'll change our mind about in 5 years.
Oh, yes.
Maybe tomorrow, you know, but that's okay. That's allowed in the discipleship of Jesus.
Yeah. Because I think, honestly, one of the only way to find rest in this topic is in like deciding to be comfortable in something that's uncomfortable.
Sure.
Because that question of like, is Jesus king? Are the claims that Jesus made true? If the honest answer that you arrive to is no, Jesus was not God, Jesus is not king, and I'm not about following him, that may be really uncomfortable for you if you have previously identified as a Christian.
Yes.
Like that's really uncomfortable. It's really, really hard. And a lot of people are going through that. I mean, we're walking with some people going through that, and that is really hard and uncomfortable. But guess what? It's also really hard and uncomfortable when the answer is yes.
Yeah.
There's some things that are really hard about following Jesus and deciding that he is king, because you're still going to have questions. You're still going to have doubts. And there are things that Jesus invites us into that go against our flesh. I mean, it's a huge part of faith, is that it is actually difficult, and you have to actually deny yourself and sometimes deny culture and all of these things to follow Jesus. And so I think there is rest in knowing that wherever you land on whether or not Jesus is real and worth following, just accepting that you might be uncomfortable most of the time, because I think sometimes we use deconstruction as a place to like harbor some safety and some comfort, and like I don't really know, kind of either way. And there's like something genuine when you are exploring and you're just in that process, if you are actively in the process of deciding. But sometimes I think we do use it as a cop-out. I heard you say that, Josh, earlier, and that's not always the case, but sometimes we can retreat into like, I just want to be comfortable, like I don't know, there's things I like about Jesus and I don't want to totally opt out, but like,
and I think the hard part, and like I wish Jesus wasn't like this at times, but he just is. Like he doesn't let you be neutral on him.
Right.
You know,
ultimately
he just doesn't. Like he does not allow. He says wild things. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father except through me. He calls himself the door to like the presence of God. Like he does not let you say like, I like the ethical teachings of Jesus, but I'm not really into the institution of the church or the deity of God. It's like he does not let you do that. If the claims that he made, I would make him an like egomaniac, a lying egomaniac that is intentionally deceiving.
Yeah.
Or is like an insane person that we all are wild. Like, so like and the claims that Jesus makes and that Christians make don't let you be neutral on it. And so there is a time, I think, to just be like, okay, like I'm going to figure it out. But ultimately at some point, Jesus's own presence doesn't allow you to do that.
And I will say that in that you can be in process about things within faith. Like, what do I think about X?
100%.
Yes.
You're going to probably always be, if you're being honest, once again.
Honest. Like, following Jesus isn't about being like, I have the answers now. It's about, you're going to be in process in all of that. But I think your point, G, is ultimately there's a settling on, is Jesus Lord or not?
Yeah.
Now,
and it's going to be uncomfortable either way.
Yeah. Because it's about ultimately submitting to whatever you find Jesus says about whatever XYZ thing. Like Garrett is saying, like determine what it is you want to believe and then know that under submission of Jesus, that may not actually be the truth.
Right. So like, because the other place it'll be uncomfortable is that if you land on no, you have to be honest with your Christian friends that they're literally believing insane things.
Yeah, because it is insane.
It's insane.
It's totally insane. And I like totally get it if you don't believe that Jesus is king, because it's more insane than not.
So I think that's what it means, especially for people that grew up as Christian, is that they want to be still like nice about it. And that's great. Like I'm about nice things, but like be nice to one another. But just be honest. If you do land, like Christianity is insane. Jesus was a lunatic or a liar, you know, like, and he just doesn't let you be anything himself, be anything else. And that is uncomfortable. That will be uncomfortable for people that have grown up as Christians with their Christians friends to be honest about what that means with their,
because it's tough to say he's a great teacher, but when you look at the things that he said, it's hard to just accept one part of who he is. Because I think we often, and people, I think often will land on, well, Jesus was a really good moral teacher, a really good example and all those things. But it's hard to claim that if you don't believe in who he actually is.
Totally.
Because it doesn't, he's a liar, he's a lunatic in other words.
Man, I'm still thinking about how uncomfortable both of those scenarios are.
Totally.
Like I would love to believe. It would be so much easier for me to believe that if someone broke into my house, I should be able to defend my family.
Yes,
That would be
exactly.
way
There's so
easier.
many mandates Jesus has for us
Yeah.
that make it more difficult.
I know, but I believe in Christian nonviolence. Hot take. And
Yeah, I was like, you just really opened up like a whole.
I know,
nother
but the
room
thing is like,
with
I would
that
love to
small
believe that.
comment.
I know. Sorry, that will be another podcast. But
It's probably so loud for
I know,
people.
sorry if you're here. But like, I would just love, that would be so much easier
Yeah.
for me to believe. But like
Oh,
what I
yeah.
see in the witness of Jesus is distinctly different. And so
Yeah.
I'm just like, gosh, man, when we were talking about this in our pre-meeting, I was like, oh yeah, that would be uncomfortable. But I think the profundity of what you just said is like really striking me.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel, at least in my conversations too, I know we're all kind of sharing from our own personal experiences, like that almost guilt or shame around the thought of admitting to themselves or others, like, I am not a Christian. And I think it's really interesting, and it's probably a lot of social and cultural and like growing up in the church, but it's interesting that we would feel like almost like, and maybe this is just in my head, almost like I'm afraid of how God will feel if I
Admit he's not real.
that he's not real. Exactly. That's what it feels like the
Yes,
fear is.
yes.
And I think that for those of us who are seeking what we believe about God, it's interesting because I think even that feeling in and of itself projects a particular view of God that we have, which is God is forcing me or somehow needs me to follow him. And if I don't, like, I am
disappointed.
Yeah, he's disappointed. I'm guilty. I am doing something wrong, etc. And I think that's a really interesting view of God that might be helpful to break down if you find yourself feeling that. And I think all that to say, a way that I think we can find rest in this, a small part, is to recognize that the God that we believe in does not force himself on us, that God does not force us to choose him, and that we are free to choose to follow Jesus or not. Like I think it's Galatians, Paul says, for freedom you have been set free. Like, we are free to choose to follow Jesus. We are free to not. Every time Jesus in the Gospels gives invitations, it is an invitation. It is,
Yes.
come and follow me. If you want to be my disciple,
Yes.
here's what you need to do. If you want to follow me, here's what that looks like. And then says crazy things like, if you want to be my disciple, die to yourself every single day, which is a huge thing to choose.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah,
if
totally.
you want to be his disciple, you get to pick up your cross every day, deny yourself, and follow Jesus. And if you don't want to do that, you don't have to.
Yep.
And I know, like we've been saying, it is scary to admit, and it might feel like like even more dissonance. But then I would maybe even encourage you in that to ask, like, why do you feel that? Like, why is there a fear around admitting that that I'm not identifying as a Christian? Like, maybe because rather than actually you don't believe, maybe you have a misunderstanding of who God is. But also, I still want to say, like, you can find rest by feeling the freedom to say you don't want to follow Jesus. Like, and I think what I see a lot of and what I hear a lot of is the church is only okay with me deconstructing if I end up on the other side following Jesus. Yeah. And I don't think that's true.
I don't think that's true.
Like,
either.
we don't feel like that.
Yeah,
Right?
I have so many friends in my life that have walked, that I'm still friends with to this day. People in our communities here in Washington that we all know that have walked the path, and we are all still really good friends. We have very interesting conversations over drinks, but but we're still, you can still be friends.
And have an immense amount of respect for, because like, I'm thinking of people in my head right now who walked a genuine path of deconstruction and decided what I believe is the most true thing is that Jesus is not real or is not king or is not worth following. Yeah. And that they had the courage to determine that feels the most true to them. And I have a ton of respect for that.
Yes,
yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
And I will say one more thought on that, Molly, that I feel pressed to say is, for those of us who are Christians and are identifying as Jesus followers, I think it's really important to be people who believe what you say you believe. Like, for example, like what you just said, Molly, like Jesus says, die to yourself daily. And I think so often why deconstruction is occurring is because Christians who say they believe something aren't doing the thing that they say they believe. And there's grace for that. Like God loves you. All that is true. But I would say that if we make that decision, there's a why there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's a why to, like, if we make that decision that Jesus is Lord and we're going to commit to that, part of the healing work that can be done is actually committing to it.
Yeah.
Like actually being faithful, actually saying, I'm going to believe what I say I believe. Because that sounds like a simple statement.
Right.
But I think what we often have and what we encounter is, I believe in these ideas and that God exists, but so what?
Yeah.
And there's just not there's not room for a so what.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like what you're saying is like oftentimes Christians live lives of functional atheism, you know, and I think like where they believe in God and they can, I think Brendan Manning says, he says like what an unbelieving world finds unbelievable is a group of people that confess Jesus with their Lord, Jesus is Lord with their mouth, but then walk out the church door and then live a life that denies that he actually exists. And like, I just find that super compelling. And I will say, even though we're encouraging you to follow it all the way down, I want to just articulate clearly. I think that the ethical vision of Jesus, the way of following him, is the most compelling way to live, hands down. Even though the church has been unfaithful, even though there is moments historically that it has caused massive levels of harm, whether that's slavery or the Crusades, that it has done massive amounts of damage. But there is not an institution or belief system in the world that is not true of. There's not one. Whether it's communism, atheism, whether it's Buddhism, like any philosophical system. I do believe Jesus is the most compelling way to live. And I think that I trust when Jesus says, ask, search, knock. Ask, search, and knock, and the door will be open to you. I believe that if you walk down that path, that the door of truth will be opened, and you will begin to see things. And that's why I can encourage you to go down that. Even though like it might still land, you might still land in the pot. Like, I don't believe the evidence, and that's totally fine. But I do believe Jesus is the most compelling way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Amen.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you can stay tuned for all of our content.